When I launched my podcast a year ago, I really struggled to get more than 100 downloads per episode. Fast forward a year later, and I've now accumulated over 80,000 downloads, and I've gained majority of those downloads within the last 6 months or so. So how did I do it? Well, there were 5 things that I put into place which massively changed the trajectory of my podcast. And I'm going to break down each of those 5 changes in today's video. This video is brought to you by Descript's new remote recording feature. More on them later. Okay, so let's kick off with the first change that I made, and this one's going to come with a harsh truth, so buckle up.
Buckle up.
The harsh truth is that it's not enough just to create an Instagram account or a TikTok account or whatever type of social media account you want to create to promote your podcast and then just sit back and wait for the downloads to pour in. It just doesn't quite work like that, right? And that was very much my marketing strategy for the first 6 months of my podcast. So when I decided actually I was going to step it up a gear, it meant that I had to review my marketing strategy and actually decide to do something a bit different. So instead of relying on the odd post promoting my podcast on my social media channels, I decided to approach things a bit differently. The first thing that I did is I launched a multi-channel strategy, which basically means I didn't just rely on my Instagram channel, for example. I also relied on the other marketing channels that I had at my disposal. Now, because I had spent a few years building an email list, which is essentially a list of emails of your subscribers and your followers so that you could email them directly, it meant that I had an entire email list that I could utilize to promote my podcast. And for context, at the time of filming, I have just over 16,000 subscribers on this email list. And if you want to know how I did that, I will link to a video up here so that you could learn how. So when it came to promoting my podcast on my email list, I decided to do a few different things. I do these end of month wrap-ups where I share the lowdown on all of the podcast episodes that went live in the previous month, including direct links for people to listen to them. Also, if I have a particularly interesting, thought-provoking episode, which obviously I try for all of them to be that interesting, but some end up being a lot more interesting than others, I will create a dedicated email, or I should flag, I don't write the email. My very talented marketing manager will write it for me, but she will write a dedicated email to my 16,000 subscribers breaking down the key learnings from that podcast episode so that people could get value from the email by itself, but they could also find out more by listening to the actual full episode. In addition to this, another thing I did, which was very tactical, but led to a huge jump in follower count for my podcast, is host events. So I actually host events for creators and entrepreneurs as part of my media company called The Creator Project, which my podcast also sits under. So when I was planning these events, I realized that actually this is a really great opportunity for me to promote this podcast. So what I would do is I would include a pop-up on the screen for everyone who was watching the event during the breaks, which just said, if you want to continue learning after this event, then why not check out the podcast? And this done wonders for my numbers. Okay, so let's move on to the second change that I installed. So in order for me to explain this, I need to give you some context. When I first launched my podcast, it looked a lot different to how it looks now. It even had a different name. And previously, my podcast was full of solo episodes where I would dive into a specific topic. And to be honest, they weren't that different from my YouTube content. This changed when I decided to do the rebrand and the refresh and make all of these changes, which led to its growth. And in addition to a new name and a new spin on my solo episodes, which are now more like my hot takes, I also added in a new type of content. And this type of content were industry interviews. Now, I kind of did this for slightly selfish reasons because I've always wanted to do this. And I did find myself in a situation where I was like, I've met a lot of cool people and I know my audience would get so much value from hearing from what these cool industry figures have to say. What also ended up happening though, was I was able to gain access to a whole new audience because every time I interviewed someone, they would share that podcast interview with their audience, which would give me exposure to their audience. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this only works if you're interviewing celebrities or really big influencers. Obviously, it works absolute wonders in that case because they have big audiences.
Obviously.
But they aren't the only people who could help spread the word about your podcast. As long as you are interviewing or featuring people who are directly related to who your podcast audience are, then you may be unlocking the potential that this guest is going to get you in front of the right people, because that's more important. It's more important for my guest speakers to give me access to creators and entrepreneurs than it is for a guest speaker to give me access to millions of people who don't care about content creation or marketing, right? The targetedness, is that a word? I don't know, let's run with it. The targetedness of my guest episodes is what really helped me grow. So consider doing this for your podcast too. Pro tip, and this one's going to cost a bit of money, that's why I'm just going to throw it in there as a pro tip and not a necessity. If you can interview these people face to face and video these interviews, not only does it make for incredible YouTube content, but it also gives you the ability to create short form vertical videos that you can share on Instagram, on TikTok to really help get the word out about your podcast. Let's talk about the third change I made, because this is a really important one. This change involves my decision to use Squadcast by Descript to do all of my remote recording episodes. So these are essentially when I'm interviewing someone remotely, so we're not face-to-face, or if I'm recording myself remotely. I'm going to be real with you. As someone who has their own podcast, but also listens to copious, is that the right word? If you're new to my channel, you might not know that I have this habit of using words for the first time when I'm on camera and not knowing if I'm using them correctly. So let's just run with whatever I say. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and the quickest way to put someone off of your podcast is to have poor quality audio. We've all been there. We found a podcast which has a really engaging title and seems super up our street, really interesting. We press play and our ears like recoil because the audio quality is just so poor, which is why I now use Squadcast by Descript to record my remote episodes. When you use Squadcast by Descript, you can record anywhere while still ensuring studio quality audio through all of your episodes. Your guests can join a recording session from their phone or their web browser, and they don't need to create an account in order to join the sessions. In addition to this, your audio and your video is recorded in 4K quality and it's recorded locally. This ensures that your recordings are consistently high quality, even if you lose connection or your computer crashes. This is incredibly useful. I can't overstate how useful this is, because prior to using this platform, I've been in several situations where my internet has just decided to drop out and it's massively impacted the quality of my recording. A few other features which I absolutely love about using this tool includes their robust editing tools, which replace like single-use editors. So not only do you have access to the must-have editing tools, but Descript will even automatically transcribe your entire podcast episode for you once you're done recording, which, whilst we're on the subject of marketing your podcast, you could actually use and repurpose and turn into an email newsletter or maybe even a blog post. Their AI features allow you to do things like remove filler words, like when you say and a lot, don't worry, we all do it. You can also do things like remove your background noise, enhance your speech, and even, and this part I thought was incredible, you can overdub, which basically means you can clone your voice and allow you to tweak parts of your recording where you misspoke without you having to re-record that section. Mind-blowing. Squadcast by Descript is built for your entire podcasting workflow, allowing you to integrate with other tools, collaborate with others, leave comments on different edits, and even giving you access to social clips and different templates too. And all of this is available to you at no extra cost because it's included in Descript. If you want to check out Squadcast by Descript, head to the link in my description. Okay, so the fourth change that I made is I reviewed my presenting style. Now, I'm still in the process of tweaking this, and every single time I record, I review how that recording went and I tweak it even further. So let me break down what I mean. So everyone has different presenting or hosting styles. And I think a lot of us go into podcasting naively, thinking that it's the same as us just speaking to someone who's in front of us. When actually, when we're really serious about growing a podcast, we have to take some time to consider the way in which we're presenting whatever information our podcast is about. Let's take interviews, for example. What kind of interviewer do you want to be if that's the type of content you create on your podcast? Are you going to be an interviewer which has a list of predetermined questions? Are you going to be an interviewer who does a lot of research? Or are you going to be the type of interviewer who likes to ask questions they don't know answers to and then have a genuine organic reaction to them during the actual podcast episode? You know, what kind of interviewer do you want to be? I've actually featured on a few different podcast episodes before, and I've had such different experiences. On the one hand, I've had podcast interviews where the host has done an insane amount of research on me and my business. And then we have a briefing call before the episode. So I know what they're going to ask me. They know what they're going to ask me. And it's very rehearsed and it creates a great piece of content. But then on the opposite side of the scale, I've had interviews where they haven't even sent me a brief. And it's just been like, hey, do you want to go on my podcast? We'll just have a chat and see where the conversation takes us. And that's also resulted in an incredible piece of content and a really lovely filming experience. So all of that to say that there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just important that you consider what style you're going to incorporate and you run with it. And the same goes for your solo episodes. Are you going to be the type of solo podcast host who does 10-minute, 20-minute bite-sized episodes because you like to get your point across quickly? That's very much who I am. I blame YouTube for that. When you're a YouTuber, you're just very used to like getting things across before someone gets bored and clicks off your video. So that means that my solo episodes are usually only 10 to 20 minutes long. Or are you going to be the type of host who lets themselves really sink into a subject, explore every single angle of it and talk for hours about it? You know, again, both options create great pieces of content, but you've really got to stick to one and learn to refine it. The fifth thing that I did, and one of the most significant things that I did, is I shared a survey with my audience before I rebranded my podcast. Do not worry, if you're not going for a rebrand and maybe you're launching something fresh, there's still an opportunity for you to survey your audience. And if you don't have an audience yet, for example, maybe you don't have an audience on social media yet, don't fret. You can find Facebook groups or forums which are dedicated to talking about the same subject that your podcast is about, or maybe are home to where your podcast audience tend to hang out. And you can share your survey in there. The point of this is that you're going to get feedback and remove the guesswork out of your podcast. A lot of us don't like to do this because then we're like, oh God, what if someone tells us something that we don't want to hear? And then we tell you they probably will. They probably will. But wouldn't you rather have the data and the information and the feedback from a survey, which quite literally says, we as your audience would prefer option A rather than option B? Would you not rather have that information versus continuing your plans to focus on option B and it taking months, if not years, for you to realize that you're actually doing something that your audience doesn't want? And the type of questions I would ask in my survey is everything from, what is the ideal length of a podcast episode that you enjoy? If I were to interview people on my podcast, what type of people would you like me to interview? What type of questions would you like me to ask them? Etc, etc. Okay, guys, that's the end of today's video. I hope you found it useful. If you feel like hanging around, I recommend watching this video. It's actually the very first podcast episode I ever uploaded. It's a video podcast, and I think it gives you a really great example of what I'm talking about when I spoke about how interviewing guests face-to-face and recording the interviews can create really engaging content. If you feel like checking out Squadcast by Descript, head to the link in my description. You won't regret it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I look forward to seeing you in my next video.